You've been hearing us talk about imperial yeast for a while now, and that's because we absolutely love the stuff. With 200 billion cells in each pitch-right pouch, we rarely need to make starters these days. While originally based out of Portland, Oregon, imperial yeast has expanded to the East Coast, meaning even more people have access to their incredible lineup of yeast, including popular strains like A07 Flagship, A38 Juice, A09 Pub, and a Brülosophy favorite, L17 Harvest. So good. Whether you brew at home or on the commercial scale, imperial yeast has what you need to make the best beer possible. You can check out all of their available strains and start your planning at imperialyeast.com. It does not feel like it's been that long since Kate and I came together to chat about our views on 2022, yet here we are in December, a full year later, looking back on 2023. Sentimentalist that I am, I do tend to enjoy taking a step back from the hustle and bustle to reflect on things. This is the Brülosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me on this episode to do just that is contributor Jordan Folks.
2023 was my first full year as a contributor. I started, I think, maybe November of 2022. And so it's been a wild ride just this first year alone. I'm excited to kind of recap it.
Heck yeah, man. And this was certainly an interesting year for Brülosophy for more than a few reasons. Whereas our focus the last couple of times we've done these episodes was on the direct effect COVID was having on us, at the time. This year was more about dealing with the lasting impact that it's had, or at least that's how I view it. Kind of the fallout, if you will, if that's what you want to call it. That's not to say anything was necessarily bad, but there's no getting around the fact that the brewing and beer landscape is just different now than it was before. I really am looking forward to kind of going over this stuff with you, Jordan, and sharing our opinions on all of it. Now, please be reminded that this is a Brews Views episode where we allow ourselves to let loose a little bit more than usual, meaning we may use some language that some aren't comfortable with, so there's your warning. If you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support, consider becoming a patron of Brülosophy over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. By making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. We are doing something a little bit different this month, December of 2023. My friends Tim, Justin, and Craig are going to be joining me to review a handful of beers that are going to make you jealous you don't have, Jordan. They're all but impossible for us to get out here in California, and we're going to be broadcasting it live to our patrons, during which we are also going to take some questions. These beers are being sent to me from a patron and fan of the show. They're all, I guess, Northeast, brewery, big name breweries out there. Hazy IPAs is what I was told. So we'll see. They're supposed to arrive in the coming days, and they will be in the fridge until we review them. Again, it's going to be a different day than we usually do. It'll be a Friday night, and we are going to broadcast live to our patrons in our private Patreon group. So to be a part of that, you have to make your pledge of just $3 or more at patreon.com/Brülosophy no later than this Thursday, December 14th, 2023, as we're going to be reviewing those beers on Friday the 15th. All past sessions are available on our private Patreon and Facebook pages, so you can go back and watch them whenever you like. Learn more about becoming a patron and check out all of the rewards we offer for your support over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at brülosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. No change at all to your shopping experience, and we get a little bit of a commission for that referral. It helps us cover the cost of running this show, the website, the Brülosophy show, all that stuff. Finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a rating and review of this show in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, that would be awesome too. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who are known for their awesome all-in-one electric brewing systems. I've brewed on both their 120 and 240-volt systems. I'm telling you, these things are awesome, efficient, easy to use with a relatively small footprint. You're not going to be disappointed with these units. Plus, the guys behind the company run an amazing YouTube channel, which you can find by searching YouTube for Clawhammer Supply. If you're in the market for electric brewing gear or even just reasonably priced kettles, make sure to check out what Clawhammer Supply has to offer at clawhammersupply.com. And don't forget to let them know Brülosophy sent you when you're checking out. That's clawhammersupply.com. Listener Tony Weatherington wrote in with feedback after listening to episode 187 from a few years ago, where we talked about using stainless mesh hop filters during the boil. This has actually been something that's been coming up quite a bit lately. I think you are aware of that, Jordan. Tony said, I'm a new fan of Brülosophy and currently catching up on the podcast. I'm on episode 187 now. I'm not sure if it's ever been considered, but I make hoppy beers and just throw the hops right into the kettle. I then no-chill the wort in the boil kettle overnight to bring it down to pitching temperature. When I'm ready to pitch the yeast, I pour the wort from the spigot using a sanitized hose through a fine mesh strainer that sits right on top of my fermenter. This allows me to drain and filter the wort without much impact to hop utilization. I've tried hop spiders in the past and just don't like how much wort is absorbed when using it. I also notice a difference in my beer using a hop spider versus throwing hops straight into the kettle. The hop aroma and flavor just isn't as good to me when using a hop spider. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on this. Jordan, what say you?
Well, first off, my eyes lit up when I heard that he's leaving the hops in the kettle overnight. Like, wow, it makes me wonder, if there's some level of extraction, if he has to reduce the amount of hops he uses, because I've never done the no-chill, but that's what I've heard, is that it's kind of tricky in terms of, continued isomerization, and not leaving the hops or not pulling the hops out would, in theory, increase that. So that's interesting. Right. Never heard of that. But I love this idea of using, trying to catch it on the way into the fermenter. I do have the same wonders about a hop spider. I like the, trube removal aspect of it, especially if using a plate chiller, it's kind of necessary. But when it comes to Whirlpool editions, I've always wondered if you're getting less of the good stuff when using a hop spider, at the very least, if it's contained. If your hop basket is the size of your kettle, what's the difference? And so that's something I've actually been messing around with is with the claw hammer units, you can't use, and they say this, you cannot use the grain basket for a hop basket because like the mesh or whatever, it boils over. But at Whirlpool, once you kill the temp, it's perfect and it spans the entire kettle. So I do think that there might be something there, and that's something I want to continue to test both with like our observable or perception, but as well as, maybe some lab data. Yeah,
that's something that we were talking about just this last week, right? Pretty extensively after Martin's latest episode on the Brülosophy show, namely, IBU and bitterness levels when using different types of hop filtration. It is something that I've thought a lot about over the years that I've been brewing, and I'm not convinced that using a hop spider or even like a hop bag or something like that is necessarily doing what people fear it's doing. But then again, we've got the very first experiment we did on filtering kettle hop additions with a fabric bag came back significant. I won't get too deep into those details. We'll save that for its own show. But those beers were different. I nailed it every single time. I brewed those beers and they were different. So something could be happening there, Tony. Like you said, Jordan, I've always thought, well, okay, so if you're telling me that if I use a stainless mesh filter that's smaller, it could have an impact differently than if that stainless mesh filter happens to be the size of the kettle, because the argument could be made, well, the kettle also has stuff sticking to it. Why would, having another little piece of stainless in there make that big of a difference? Who knows? My thoughts on your approach though, Tony, is that if it works for you and you're happy with the results, that's really what matters the most. So keep doing it. Personally, again, as it goes for no-chill brewing, I've not made a no-chill batch that I like better than batches where the wort was chilled quicker. So there's that. But I know plenty of people who, like you do, run their wort through a sieve during transfer to a fermenter. It's a totally fine method. It does get out a lot of that particulate matter. I like you, Jordan, I think it's curious that you're leaving those hops in contact with the wort, that hot wort, for so long. But if it works for you, again, that's what you got to keep doing. So thank you so much for writing in, Tony. If you have show feedback, you could send it to feedback@brülosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. Alrighty, when we're back from this break, our views on 2023. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brülosophy sent you. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Xchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Xchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. If you would have asked me 5 years ago where I thought Brülosophy would be at the start of 2024, well, I'm not sure exactly how I would have responded, but I'm pretty certain it would have been different than where we're actually at today, thanks to COVID, for better or for worse. As all things do, Brülosophy has evolved in those first few years that we were around, but it's nothing compared to the changes that have occurred since 2020. And as we approach our 10-year anniversary, which I can't even believe it is only a couple of months away from now, it's interesting to look back on everything and how, what that evolution has looked like. One thing that I'm beyond thrilled about, Jordan, is having you on this episode with me. If I'm not mistaken, it was right around a year ago that you really started to contribute. You joined the crew, I think you mentioned in November or something of 2022. But really, this is your first full year, and now you're sitting on this show talking with me about the last year.
It's kind of wild, because I was watching and reading and listening from pretty much the start. And so who would have thought that here I am sitting on the other side of the microphone, as it were?
Yeah, and before, this is a Brews Views show, so we can talk about whatever we want. We could talk about whatever we want whenever we want anyways, but what has it been like for you? We talk about you internally as being the more traditional brewer, somebody who tends to stick with, I don't want to make it sound like you are just a diehard conventionalist by any means, but you do, and especially with lager brewing, you tend to be more abiding by the traditional approaches. And, historically, it's been people with that sort of a perspective who tend not to appeal to them too much. But you're here doing it and we love it. What's it been like for you for the last year?
Well, I kind of always read the articles with a bit of like shock and disgust, like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe they're fermenting this lager warm. But, like a train wreck, I couldn't look away. And it's been, when Cade said that he was moving to Oregon, I immediately emailed him. I was like, hey, you got to come to my homebrew club. You got to do an experiment, because I was deep down was like, I want to try one of these guys' beers.
Right.
Do they know what they're doing? Do they brew good beer? And then can I taste the difference in a triangle test? And so that's really how it all started and how I started getting to know you guys. And now that I'm doing it myself, it's been really fun to actually sit down and test the things that I think make a difference. And, the ones that you're like, dude, there's no way that I'm going to be able to tell a difference. I can. And the ones that are like, this matters so much, it's going to be night and day. Those are the ones I can't. And so it's really been cool to actually be able to test for myself beyond just reading the website.
Yeah, it's interesting because understandably, I think that we get viewed, Brülosophy in general, and that's the umbrella, but everybody who's under that umbrella, all of us contributors, we tend to get viewed as intentionally trying to disprove, traditional approaches or trying to shit on, the people who came up with these other ideas. And that is not the case at all. And I think you've probably witnessed that over the last year being a part of this, that just like you, Jordan, when I started doing this, my whole purpose was I want to see why we do these things, right? So I can't wait to make this potentially bad beer, right? And to know what doing these different processes that you're not supposed to do or whatever, I want to know what that tastes like. And yes, the results were far different than I ever expected, but that doesn't change my intention. I'm not out here promoting people brewing short and shoddy. It's funny because we hear people on other podcasts sometimes talking about us from that perspective, like we're out here not doing science right. That's the fun one is, Brülosophy is not science. Well, it's more science than what you're doing, whoever's saying saying that, for the most part, it's just an interesting thing. It's like people need that scapegoat. And since we're the ones providing that data, this is how I view it, at least, that we're often that scapegoat is, well, don't pay attention. We need to poo-poo their results. They're not real, whatever it is.
Well, I think that it's important for listeners to know that our intentions really are pure and that we really are just curious, does variable X make an impact?
Yeah.
And we often see a observable impact like FG or something, but then darn it, you can't taste a difference. And this, myself personally, honest to God truth, have been blown away by that, where I'll have like an FG difference and I cannot taste the difference. And clearly there is a difference. But on the margins, people can't easily detect the difference between them. Now, obviously, there are other cases where it is statistically significant, as difficult as it may be for some to detect it, or others where it's super significant, like the time that I experimented with adding yeast in hop water. And so it really does run the gamut, but we're not trying to prove that brewing crappy beer is okay. We're just like curious, does lager fermentation temperature matter and things like that? And sometimes the results shock us.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I've been doing this for, like I said, almost 10 years, and I'm still regularly shocked by, what the stuff that we're producing. Now, I get the arguments. I'm a psychologist in my real life. I have a tendency to kind of wonder about others' motivations. And, if somebody is out there talking shit on us in a public forum, one, I thought we were grown-ups, but two, part of me is like, what is driving that? What's your concern? Usually we only attack when we feel threatened, right? As animals. And so it is something that I think is interesting, but that is for another episode. We could easily go down that rabbit hole for hours, Jordan. As it goes, thinking about 2023 and all that's happened, you are one of the best parts of 2023, my friend. I want you to know that. We love having you on board. I do feel like 2022 is really the first full year out of COVID. At least where I live, we didn't have any strict lockdowns. Places were back to being open for business. Most people I know went back to work. It was mostly normal as far as society is concerned. But for many people in industries like brewing and beer, it was a year of seeing where things were going to settle and hoping for the best. Now that we're at the end of 2023, we've got even more data on that. And it'd be disingenuous for us to pretend that everything is all peachy, at this point, or at least that it was as good as it was prior to COVID. That is just factually wrong. And, from my perspective and for a number of reasons, it just feels like we've had to accept a sort of new normal. And honestly, as the guy who's been behind Brülosophy since the very beginning, I'm admittedly still trying to figure out like what exactly that means for us. Jordan, you've been involved in the scene, Brülosophy for a year, but brewing and the brewing scene for much longer than that. What are your thoughts on where things are today in general, given what we've gone through over the last few years?
Well, one thing I think is different is this, right? The access to information, podcast, YouTube, internet. When I started over 10 years ago, you read a book. And so I do think that the community is kind of like thriving in terms of like open source content. However, I hear that homebrew clubs, their membership is dwindling. I hear AHA membership has gone down. And so I think that there's been a bit of this COVID push to virtual that we haven't totally rebounded from, and that in-person activities are not as popular as they once were, and maybe even homebrewing as a hobby has dipped a little.
Well, that seems to be the case, right? It's very difficult to find hard data, but the Brewers Association does release an annual kind of overview of things in the craft brewing world and such, and from that you can kind of pull some interesting information. I mean, the truth of the matter is, based on what my contacts in the industry are saying, what we're seeing with closures of breweries, when we're looking at craft brewing just in general, people are drinking less beer these days than they were prior to COVID. And there's, whether that is a shift to alternative adult beverages like, White Claw or hard water, hard seltzer, ciders, meads, we don't really know, but we know that people are drinking less beer. And that's not a good thing, because these brewers they're spending more money to make that beer because of increased cost of goods. And so now you go out to a brewery or a brew pub. My wife and I met her I was driving home from work on Friday, this last Friday, and she texts me and says, "Hey, meet me at this area, for some last minute Christmas shopping." Okay, cool. We meet up, and the first thing we do is go to this brew pub. That's where we met up. I paid $9 for a pint of oatmeal stout. $9 for a freaking pint of oatmeal stout. That would have been what, $6 4 years ago? I mean, that's a lot of cash for somebody to go drop on something they just enjoy for fun, a luxury, if you will.
Yeah, I travel a lot for my job, and I definitely have noticed that craft beer is getting really expensive. Outside of Oregon, we have the best craft beer prices in the country, man. We went to this bar the other night, and 20-ounce Nonic, I think the British pints were still $6.50. Still $6.50 for a Nonic pint of craft beer here. But then you go down to California and a Pilsner's $9. Or if a California company opens a location in Portland, it's $9. And that's tough for a Pilsner, dude.
Exactly. And it creates this barrier to entry for beer drinkers, because we know the people who move into home brewing are people who start off enjoying craft beer, right? Or any kind of beer, really. Well, if a pint costs, $7 to $9, whereas it used to be $4 to $6, that's going to keep a lot of people from wanting to go out and pay that money, to drink it. And so I wonder, that trickle down effect is to what extent is just the cost of a pint of good beer, keeping people away from actually joining the hobby of brewing,
Well, to be fair, I would assume that we're seeing rises in prices across the board. I mean, freaking cocktails, like, mixology cocktails, the entry price is $20 at this point.
Holy moly.
I was in Seattle a couple weeks ago, and this cool cocktail bar in Cap Hill, which is college students who I can't believe they can afford this. Cocktails were like $25.
Holy shit.
And this is
crazy.
This is not a 100-year-old aged bottle of bourbon or anything,
Right.
But it's a thoughtfully crafted cocktail. And so in terms of the statistics, I believe that what I heard recently, the latest results, is that brewing sales are down, but it's shifting to other alcoholic beverages. So they're not seeing a significant decrease in overall alcohol consumption in the United States. It's just that it's shifting preferences, and it's on the margins. It's a percentage point, 2 percentage points, but it seems but we still hear more breweries opening every day. So supply's going up, but demand's going down.
Yeah, I read a statistic the other day that there's actually been it's by a very small margin, but there's been more new breweries in the last 12-month time period or whatever they were measuring it in than there are that closed. So there's still, technically, if you look at it, it's still new breweries. But I have to wonder, are these new breweries, are they little 5-barrel, 7-barrel nanos that have where the guys there actually have, or the people who work there have other jobs because they, the breweries that are closing down. I mean, I've heard some big name breweries that are shuttering, and it's just a bummer, dude. Like, what is going on here? Or they have to close a tap room or something, even because they can't support having another place. They have to serve out of their brewery now because it's a lot cheaper to do that. Like, all of that has an effect. I just think it's really interesting, and it's hard for me not to view that as being a kind of a long-term consequence of the whole COVID lockdown and everything we went through with that,
Yeah, I mean, like I said a second ago, we're just retreating to our basements and our computers, and people aren't going out as much, and we're losing physical homebrew stores too. The online shopping revolution is here. People don't even go to the grocery store anymore. People are too lazy to get takeout from across the street. They pay a dude $10 to walk it over for them. And it's and so
true.
And I'm an analog guy, and so forgive my get off my lawnism over here, but it's just sad that we're losing that in-person physical connection, and that thing, like the stalwarts of our hobby are fading away because people are just buying things on Amazon now.
That's an interesting point. Yeah. And it's true. I think, I've always had this perspective. You bring up Amazon, which I think is a good one to bring up. You can go there for pretty much anything you could get from More Beer or Great Fermentations or Northern Brewer or whatever. But that money is no longer going to support these businesses that we all want to stay around. I mean, like you said, there are, I feel like, the issues that homebrew shops are having are in large part due to the fact that they didn't pivot to going online and selling. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I was contacted by a really cool dude.
I believe it's called SoCal Brewing Supply, something like that.
The real nice guy. They reached out to me, and he's starting a new homebrew shop out of Southern California, and my understanding of what it looks like is they are immediately hitting it by going online, and I think that's kind of, the world evolves. You have to evolve with it if you want to stay relevant. And I mean, that's something we're going to get into talking about Brülosophy specifically here in a minute. That's something that we've had to even do. We have to look at things differently if we want to stay around. I think the biggest bummer is that those who are passionate about this, people like you and me and the rest of the crew, and the people who are going into homebrew forums and talking daily because they love this, we unfortunately have to deal with the absence of things that we love because there's not a way for those industries or those businesses to stay around. You look at, for example, I heard a rumor that the AHA is going to come this year's HomebrewCon, 2024's HomebrewCon, is going to be combined with GABF. Now, have they come out and publicly announced that it's because of a lack of membership or funds or whatever it is? No, not that I've heard. But come on, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that there's clearly something going on that is making it such that they felt it necessary to combine these two huge, relatively huge events in the brewing world. Makes you wonder.
Well, you were at the 2015 HomebrewCon in San Diego because I met you there.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I remember you asked me, are you a blogger? And I was like, no. Now here I am. And you did not go to the most recent one this last summer. So I went to both and I had fantastic times at both. But I will say that the expo hall was night and day. In 2015, wow. the NHC, as it was called, expo hall was filled to the brim with vendors.
Yeah.
2023 was like a quarter full. And I'm assuming that this has nothing to do with the prestige or marketing, expertise of the AHA. It's that there is less vendor interest and fewer companies are showing up and putting down the cash to have a booth and advertise their products. And it, was less exciting for an attendee like me to go into the expo hall because that was part of it is you'd walk out with a backpack full of free stuff. And there was just less of that this year. Fewer free stuff from the existing vendors and fewer vendors to begin with. And so I think that's an interesting kind of proxy for the decline in the amount of money that's being spent in the hobby, at least when it comes to advertising and production and stuff.
I couldn't agree more. And it's, for somebody who, we not only do we love it, but we have our fingers in it as a business as well. And it is a very interesting thing to look at. If people ask me, what is Brülosophy? I usually tell them, it's a beer and brewing media business. We produce media content, whether that's podcasts or YouTube episodes or the website. We don't have to worry about really selling anything except for advertising, which we don't shy away from talking about. But we're not selling a product. We're not selling memberships. We're not doing anything like that. We are incredibly fortunate to have people who like what we do enough to throw a couple bucks our way every month. I mean, that we wouldn't be here without that. But I think about, the AHA, for example, and the fact that they need members in order to keep members happy. It's that that whole process, and the fact that we're seeing people just leave the hobby in droves. Well, they're not going to keep paying their AHA membership fees if they're not brewing anymore. And so naturally it's going to have that impact. I'm incredibly hopeful that things rebound and that we get back to at least, 2012 numbers, maybe not that real high 2015, 2016 craziness. That was fun. I was glad to be a part of that, but where we're at now, it does. I'm not going to beat around the bush. It sucks. It sucks not having that impassioned group of people like we used to doing this. And we bring it up all the time. What do we do to make this more appealing, to break those barriers to entry? You and I don't have any impact on the things, on the cost of goods. We can't affect that. You know what I mean? We can tell people till we're blue in the face, buy bulk. Well, that bulk is still costing more than it did 5 years ago. I don't know what the answer is there.
Well, and one theory that's been floated is that we used to brew beer to make beer styles that we couldn't, easily access. That wasn't the case for me living in, Beervana, Portland, Oregon. But, if you live in rural Arkansas, you can't go to Walmart and get a world-class, fresh example of alt beer. Right. And so a lot of places in this country historically didn't have the same level of access to craft beer, let alone, in the 90s and earlier when people really were brewing for that reason. But micro brew craft beer has exploded across the country. When I moved away from Oklahoma City in 2010, there was like one crappy little technically craft brewer, microbrewery brew pub thing. Now they're like on every block, and it's really world-class beer. And so anywhere you go, there is just tons of locally produced craft beer, and grocery stores are getting better. Gas stations are getting better throughout the country. And so the need to brew your own beer in order to drink alt beer is fading. And so that's one theory, is that there's just no reason to brew beer at home anymore because there's so much good, fresh, local examples no matter where you live.
And look, people used to laugh when you're like, oh, what do you homebrew for? Well, it's a lot cheaper than going out to a brew pub. The truth of the matter is it is cheaper. And I know, oh yeah, but you're spending $1,000 on an electric brew rig. I promise you, if you're brewing as often as we do, you're going to more than make up for the cost of a $9 pints every weekend or whatever. That's fine. You also get the joy of being in a hobby and creating things and doing the whole DIY thing. The thing is, as cost of goods continues to go up, that delta between what a homebrew pint costs and what it costs to go out, it squeezes closer and closer and closer. It does kind of become hard to justify unless you are purely in it just for the hobby of it, which is great. I don't know. I can see why people might be like, I'm going to hold off on this for now. And also, the way a lot of people make homebrewing sound is that it's overly complicated. We try to demystify homebrewing, right, and make it seem way easier than a lot of others do. Still, there's a lot, even if it just means going and buying a kettle and a bag right off the bat there, it's like, what do you do with all that? I get that piece of it, but there's got to be something we can do to hopefully make it more appealing to more people. And again, I'm hopeful that things do return back to a better state than they are in right now. Now, as far as Brülosophy is concerned, being squarely in the brewing and beer camp, all of this has had an impact on what we do and how we do it. I've never shied away from talking honestly about this gig, namely that it is a business, and in order for us to keep it alive, just like any business, we have to generate some revenue to cover all of our costs. For anyone who has ever run or who has never run a small business like this one, the money shit is stressful. I'm telling you the truth. Jordan, you and I were talking about it before we even started recording. We have to keep this stuff at the forefront of our minds. There's just something weird about doing something that you love, which you built over years, and then realizing it can only continue to be done in the way that it is, or the way that you feel like it should be done, if people give you money to pay for it. If there's one thing I hate about Brülosophy, it's that. That's the one thing I hate dealing with. Every time a sponsorship contract is up and we send out invoices, I take a deep breath and cross my fingers, just hoping that sponsor stays on board. And we are incredibly grateful to all of those who have. And at the same time, we completely understand why those who haven't been able to stay with us have had to jump ship. It's based on basically all the stuff you and I just talked about, Jordan.
Yeah, I think that the sponsorship is an incredible opportunity because no lie, so many companies I never would have known about if they hadn't sponsored Brülosophy, like the Delta Firm tank. And by the way, I've always wondered your ad that you read or that you recorded, where I think it's the chiller. Did you intend to do that to sound like an infomercial?
Yes. Yes. And yeah, that was one of the first ads I ever recorded. That was for Jaded Brewing, who, by the way, is our longest standing sponsor. If you would like to chill your wort fast, you got to check out Jaded Brewing, and they love us and we love them. We're so lucky to have them on board. But yeah, I was having some fun with that one. And whenever we pull a sponsor on who wants us to advertise for them, our rates are really good, by the way. If anybody out there is listening, we've got some spots open, thanks again to COVID. But yeah, whenever I record a new commercial, I always send it out for approval to the sponsor. And Clay was like, yeah, we got to go with that. That's great. So yeah, you nailed it. You picked up, picked up what I was putting down.
It still still cracks me up because it's just so hammy. I love it.
Well, you know me, ham that I am. So, but yeah, we are deeply thankful for Patreon. That really is our number one source of support. That's not a joke. We are completely aware of how often we talk about Patreon, and there's a reason for that. I'm not embellishing anything when I say that Patreon is the reason we are still here. Without Patreon, you would not be listening to this show right now. And while I won't spend too much time harping on it because we've done that a million times already, it will absolutely be the reason that we stick around and make certain changes in the future. Now, obviously, there are other sources of support. The reason I'm bringing this up now is because the fact of the matter is we have lost quite a bit of revenue. The Brülosophy is staying around, but you have to understand that we have to find other ways to make up for our losses. And so the reason we bring this up is because we think, people out there appreciate it enough that they might be willing to do certain things. Now, if you're not interested in Patreon where you get rewarded for supporting us, and I think that's pretty rad, using affiliate links at brülosophy.com/support. We say it every episode or a lot of episodes because that helps us a little bit. You can turn off ad blockers. I know people hate ads, but if you're going to the website and you're not seeing an AdSense ad, we're not generating the revenue for that stupid ad being there. Okay, we get it. Same thing with YouTube. We get a very small amount of money every time an ad plays on YouTube, even if you skip it. But if you have an ad blocker and you're not seeing those ads, then we're getting nothing for it. It's just fun content for you to digest and do what you want with, but we get nothing for it. And so that makes doing this thing kind of stressful and difficult. And we don't want to sound like we're pandering or anything like that. But another way you could support us is by buying t-shirts on Amazon. We don't have any other merch out there right now. The reason is because that getting into the merch thing actually requires quite a bit of resources. You have to pay for large amounts of shirts, hats, whatever it is you want that just sit in a warehouse. And then you have to pay somebody to ship all that stuff for you because I've done it before and we're not doing it again. It was awful. The other thing on Amazon, if you are going to go buy t-shirts and stuff like that, please make sure that the seller is Brülosophy. If not, that money is going to somebody living in China. That is where all of these fakes, when I report them to Amazon, they tell me that they're based out of China and they're just copying what they see as being popular designs and selling it themselves for their own profit. So just make sure they're from us. But that is our ways that we support this show and that you guys can help us to do that. Again, if you just listen, that's good enough as well. We appreciate that too. We just want you to be able to keep listening. So we do have to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to be digging into a little bit more detail on how things went for Brülosophy over the last year. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of work, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. So in the last segment, we talked more generally about our views on brewing and beer over the last year. For this segment, we're going to shift our focus to stuff that's more specifically related to Brülosophy. And I guess we'll just start by talking about this show first, since that's what we're on right now, the Brülosophy podcast. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous about where Brülosophy as a business would end up in a post-COVID world, but I've been really surprised with how well this podcast has continued to do despite the current struggles and the fallout of COVID, the Brülosophy podcast continues to be ranked among the most popular brewing and beer podcasts in the world. In fact, somebody just sent me a link that I've shared with a couple of other people I forget what the website was, but it had the Brülosophy podcast was ranked, I think, number 23 out of all food related podcasts out there in terms of our reviews and all of that stuff. They kind of put everything together. That's a pretty cool sign. We are consistently ranked top 35 podcasts out of all podcasts in the hobbies category. I'm not saying that to brag, but this puts us in front of a lot of other established shows, which again, I would never have expected when we started this dorky podcast back in 2017. It really is very validating.
Well, I mean, honestly, it's my favorite brewing podcast. I'm not on it that often, and I eagerly listen every Monday at 5 p.m. West Coast time when it comes out. And I think that, we have really good audio quality and interesting, engaging conversations. And that goes a long way. It really helps when the people on the podcast know how to speak.
Yeah. Oh God. I couldn't agree with you more. And when I think about, what are the podcasts I listen to, I try to break away from the brewing stuff. What podcast do I listen to in other realms? And what are my favorites? And it's always people who you can tell love what they're talking about. And I hope that gets conveyed from our show. But also don't just do the same rote thing that everybody else is doing. I had a friend, a colleague of mine, we were just chatting. We were walking out of work the other day and she asked me, she doesn't brew, doesn't even drink beer, but she's, you have a podcast? She's asking me about it. And I told her, yeah, we have this thing. So she looked it up and came back the next day and she's like, you have over 1,000 reviews in Apple Podcasts. And I was like, yeah. She's like, that's crazy. So it's a pretty successful gig, right? I said, yeah, it's doing fairly well. And she asked me, again, another mental health person, she's like, so what do you think is behind your success? And what I ended up telling her had nothing to do with our actual content, but I think people appreciate equivocalness. And our listeners are the ones who are going to determine that for themselves. But I think what we've come to be known for, and this show really elucidates because of the fact that we're talking about it, is not telling people that things are absolute, right? You are your own brewer. You get to do things the way you want. We're sharing this data because we find it interesting, but we're not going to poo-poo you for doing something different. We're not going to tell you that just because we fermented a lager warm and it came out good, that everybody should do it that way. That's not what we're about, right? As much as others might try to spin us that way. And I think that does get conveyed. I think that comes across in a way that makes people feel comfortable. And I hope that's the case. When, like I said, when I'm listening back to these shows and I hear us talking, I'm editing them mostly is when I'm listening to them at this point, but I'm always waiting for that point where one of us makes a statement that's absolute and it's a hard recommendation, and it just very rarely happens. And I think in a weird way, some people find some comfort in that. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Well, but I think that we benefit from actually having empirical data to support what we are talking about as well, because I hate it when you listen to a brewing podcast and someone writes in with a question and their answer is, I don't know, try it both ways, see what you like. And it's like, well, I learned nothing, and if anything, I'm more inspired by the question, not the answer. And we are like, well, we did an experiment on it and tasters could or couldn't tell a difference. And based on me as the brewer, I liked this more, or I couldn't really taste a difference. And then we say, but try it for yourself. But it's nice to have some sort of matter of factness associated with a response instead of just yeah, who knows?
Yeah, there is. I agree with that, and I think there's a Mr. Wizard quality to what we're doing, or kind of a Discovery Channel type of deal. Not everybody's going to go out and talk about how much they love watching Discovery Channel, but pretty much everybody watches it. Or they have one show that they like because it gives you some knowledge. It's interesting, and I like to think that we provide that to brewers out there. What's wild to me is you look at our weekly or our monthly downloads for the podcast. It has not gone down since COVID. It plateaued there for a little bit, but we're still getting, and this is a big number. I don't usually talk numbers. We average about 96 to 100,000 downloads per month for this podcast. That's my understanding is that's pretty crazy for such a niche, hobby podcast.
Yeah. And yet when I walk into the homebrew store and, say, I have an experiment to share with everyone. I'm with Brülosophy. No one knows what it is. And so I think that a lot of the listenership are like seasoned veteran homebrewers, and newer people just aren't really tapping into all of the media that's out there yet.
Yeah, or what I've found actually, alternatively, is that it's a lot of the older guard that aren't into podcasts, or they kind of already have their approach down, and they're no longer researching ways to do things. So they're not going to brewlosophy.com or listening to the Brülosophy podcast because they're doing their own thing. What I've found is that if I go out, it's that younger. I can go to like a brewery, and someplace where I'm not buying ingredients, or I'm not even talking about brewing necessarily, just drinking beer. And, something comes up and people are, before they even, I was sitting at a bar, this happened last year, but I was sitting at the bar at Crow and Wolf, and I heard a conversation that people were having next to me about probably diacetyl or something like that. And I didn't know who they were, but the guy's like, oh yeah, there's this article on brewlosophy.com where they dosed a German Pilsner with diacetyl flavor standard, blah, blah, blah. And I just kind of left it alone, but I was like, that's kind of cool that they saw that. And it is a good point of conversation. So like I mentioned before, though, a big milestone for us was breaking that 1,000 review mark in Apple Podcasts, which did happen a couple months ago. That happened this year. And you would think out of 1,000 reviews, that average out of a 5-star. Now, this is primarily Apple Podcasts because they have all of these ways of reviewing and leaving or rating and then leaving reviews and such. But you would think that average would be, not so close to 5 stars. We're at 4.9 out of 5 stars, which again is just incredibly validating.
Well, next we're going to have Yelp for Brülosophy.
There probably already is one. Apparently somebody, I forget what one of the other review websites is, but somebody a couple years ago started one for Brülosophy that we have no say in.
Oh, great.
I forget what it is. Might have been like a Twitter thing. I don't know. Anyways, we do have some great reviews, and we have gotten so many requests since I think it was 2 years ago. I had Jersey and Tim read some of the reviews about them that had been left in Apple Podcasts. But we're not getting any bad reviews anymore, which, hey, if you want to go leave a shit review, go for it. Maybe we'll read that on the show. Our latest few, Beer Man says, I listen to you guys daily while I'm at work cleaning houses, and you guys have helped me out considerably. I listen to you for knowledge and for the fun show that it is as well. You guys rock. Keep it going. It's a great one. Cheers. Well, thank you. We love that. Arez Michal says, absolutely love this podcast. Best brewing pod. Wow, that means a lot to us, Arez. My favorite comment that somebody left, or review, I should say, in Apple Podcast came from RP Wallace 1, who says, sometimes I close my eyes while listening. I like to pretend Marshall's my friend and he is sitting right beside me. Oh man, do we have fun. We just geek out on all things homebrew and beer and pizza related. Then every fall season, we go apple picking and visit our nearest pumpkin patch. Marshall is always looking for the perfect pumpkin, while I just like to get a nice assortment of gourds to display in the house.
Are you sure this isn't your OnlyFans review page?
Well, somebody did suggest that we start an OnlyFans. I didn't know what it was when they made the suggestion, so when I Googled it, I learned. We'll just put it that way. And Brülosophy does not have an OnlyFans, so...
Well, someday. I think there's probably some market opportunity there with beard care or, beer and feet or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. People do like feet, and I hear that OnlyFans is a good place to get that satiated. So, so the Brülosophy podcast is doing well. And thinking about where we might go in the future, just with this show, we're going to hit the other stuff here in a minute. I'm happy to say we don't really have any plans to change much with the podcast. We're going to be sticking with weekly episodes in 2024, where we talk about experiments every other week while interspersing, our brews views like this, experience, short and shoddy, and the Brew and A series in between. We will keep doing the Brew and A stuff every 10th episode. We just think it's working out well, and there's no need to fix something that's not broken. So, but if listeners have any suggestions, we are always open to that. There is a chance we're going to introduce something new in the coming months. In fact, a few people have asked us about doing a Hop Chronicles series on the show, where we focus on specific varieties and go over the data that we've collected on these single hop pale ales and pale lagers. Jordan, what would you think about that?
Yeah, that's always been a tough one, right? Is like, can we really talk about a single hop for a whole hour?
I've thought about ways to do that, right? You'd have to really dig into some of the dorky stuff like, average terpene levels and concentrations and such. And I just feel like the reason we haven't done it, people ask this all the time. Well, you do it on the website. Why aren't you doing that on the show? The main reason is that I feel like, we're home brewers who love hops, but there are people out there who are far more knowledgeable about hops than we are, and they don't happen to be a contributor to Brülosophy. And I just feel like that would be better, I guess. And I don't want to come across as sounding like we're experts on the whole hop thing, and a show focused specifically on hops, I feel should have, a real expert on it. Maybe not though. I don't know.
Yeah. Or maybe there's a way to organize it, right? Like our top 5 hops for driving citrus flavor and aroma or something like that. Yeah.
That would be cool. Another way, and this is admitting that we'd be stealing the idea from Basic Brewing Radio, which is, that right there is probably my favorite brewing podcast, alongside Brülosophy, of course. But James and Steve over there have a hop series where they do like 3 or 4 different hops per episode, and they're actually tasting the beers and reviewing them, as they're going along. But we could do something where it's like, 2 hops per Hop Chronicles episode, 1 in segment 2, the other in the final segment, something like that. I don't know. If that is something you're interested in though, let us know. It could be cool. Maybe we just don't do, our typical length show. Maybe it's just a shorter episode. Who knows? Lots of possibilities there though. But what I want to talk about now, because you are involved with it, is the Brew Lab. This is a podcast that got started 2-ish years ago, and has been doing pretty well. It is a little bit, correct me if I'm wrong, because you are on the Brew Lab every other episode, Jordan. It is a much more deep dive into some of the more intricate parts of the brewing process, particularly as it relates to the science behind making beer.
Right. So for those that don't listen to the Brew Lab, it's the kind of sister podcast to this one. And on week 1, Cade interviews a brewing scientist about a recent study that they may have published or presented at a brewing science conference. And then on week 2, me and him break it down in what we call applying the science and kind of talk about what it all means in the brew house, with a bit of a tilt towards the home brewer. And so, those week 1 or week A episodes can get really heady. And, these are true brewing scientists, and English may not even be their first language. And, we're getting people from all over the world talking about incredible research that they're conducting. But me as effectively a layperson in that regard, I'm not a microbiologist. It's really complicated. And so I think that the science interview episodes, we have really strong listenership in the professional brewing community, and it's been a really great way to get that information out there in an audio format. And I really like our episodes where we come back in week 2 and really kind of talk about what it all means. And so, sure, we just heard an entire episode on fan and what that is and how it works, but what does that mean for a home brewer? And so that's been fun to kind of explore the applied side of really technical concepts.
Yeah, I think Cade kind of came up with this idea of doing applying the science part of this episode. What, like 6 months ago, Jordan? Does that sound about right?
Gosh, has it only been 6 months? It feels like years.
Maybe it's been longer. Yeah, but it's a relatively new addition to the Brew Lab, in part because of the feedback he was getting from people who are like, that is really great information when I can interpret it. Like, there's a lot. It's so deep, and it really is good. The way I like to look at the Brew Lab, or the way I've come to kind of view the Brew Lab, is that it really is, Cade is in school to be a brewing scientist. And so he presents it in a way that is almost educational in nature. It's almost like he's a professor, right? And I'm the producer and editor of that show. And so when I'm editing these, there are times, and I've been doing this for over 20 years at this point, there are times where I'm like, what the hell is being talked about right now? But for me, I love that, because then I hit Google and I'm looking stuff up and I learned something new from it. When he had the idea to start this applying the science thing with you, I mean, first off, you're such a great addition to that show. You're such a thoughtful brewer, and I think you're more like me to the extent that you like learning these new things, as heady as they might be. But what a cool way to make that information more digestible, to make it more applicable than, if you're just listening to some guy who actually did the experiment talk about the experiment. And the feedback that we've been getting on the Applying the Science series has been nothing but positive. People really do seem to love it. So good job on that.
Well, and especially, we're in theory a homebrewing podcast, right? And that one is a bit of a divergence. And so for me, it's really interesting to learn about all these highly technical things. But, when they're doing a study on, chemicals in cans or something, sometimes I'm wrapping my head around, what does this mean for me? So it's been fun to kind of like walk that out, with everyone together.
Yeah. And I think what I've really liked about the Applying the Science series that you guys are doing on the Brew Lab is that you don't stick too specific with like what you've got episode 1, like you said, that is a very specific experiment. The variable was isolated really well, and they were testing a very specific style of beer or what impact it has, really honed in. You guys broaden that, and you talk about how it can be applied in other areas. So it's not like you're just focusing on the experiment. You really are taking it and like, what can we do with this? What are the implications of those findings? And I think, again, like I said, it makes it very digestible. So if you are not listening to the Brew Lab, if you haven't given it a shot, go check it out. If you listen to the first few episodes and you got lost, try it again. It really is awesome, especially with this integration of Jordan on the Applying the Science episode. Now, for those who have been listening to either of our podcasts for longer than, 6-7 months, you've likely noticed that we have integrated dynamic advertising into each of them. These are those commercials that we didn't record ourselves and are placed in a similar way that like Google AdSense ads are on a website. Why did we do this? I'll give you one guess. Because we had to. Sponsors impacted by the current crappy state of things in the industry have had to jump ship, understandably, and prices for pretty much everything have gone up. So those ads help us to continue paying for everything we need to for this show. I don't talk numbers very much. I will tell you right now, anybody who's run a website, most of the time, if it's not a terribly popular website, it's free. You go to WordPress, you get a free website. I just paid $2,200 for server space on this website. So there's a vast difference there. That has to get paid for somehow, and my wife is not going to let me take that from our family fund. So I'll just put that out there. That's why we do these things. It's not because we're shill. It's not because we're greedy. I'm driving the same cars I've always driven. I live in the same house I've lived in since starting Brülosophy. So how can those ads be getting rid of? How can you help us to get rid of those ads? The easiest thing that you can do for listeners of these podcasts can do, at least, to get rid of these ads is by becoming a patron. It's that simple. Without getting too specific, if just 300 of the over 10,000 people who regularly listen to this show in a given week toss $3 to $5 our way every month, we'd be able to ditch those dynamic ads altogether. It would more than make up for what we've lost from the few sponsors who haven't been able to stay with us. And on top of that, you'd get some pretty rad rewards like those discounts at Yakima Valley Hops, the ability to participate in our monthly live Q&A sessions, which people seem to have a lot of fun with, and the invite to our active Brew Crew Facebook group. So if you hate the ads, but you love the show, patreon.com/Brülosophy. Go check it out. All right, so one of the more exciting things that happened in 2023, besides, of course, the introduction of Jordan Folks to the crew, is the introduction of the Brülosophy show, which, judging by both its stats and the feedback that we've received from viewers of the show, has been an overwhelming success. I don't think either Martin or I expected this thing to be as popular as it's gotten, or as well received at the very least. Since dropping the first episode back in February of this year, a bunch of people have reached out to let me know how great of an idea it was to pull Martin Keene over from the Homebrew Challenge channel, which he started, I think it was 2016 or so. Obviously, I couldn't agree more. What you watch the Brülosophy show, Jordan? What are your thoughts? How do you feel like we're doing with this this new outlet?
In terms of producing quality content, it kicks ass. Martin, has the benefit of being British, and so there's a bit of like an audio ASMR experience listening to him, silently, coolly talk about these things. But he does this kind of for a living as well. And like, I think he's making like instructional videos. So he's got the voice, he's got the, you know, persona, and he's got like a studio that he built in his basement or garage or whatever. And so I think that it looks great. It sounds great. And it's super interesting. We've got, you know, classic experiments, and it's kind of cool, I think, for viewers to get to see some behind the scenes there, but then also wacky stuff like open fermenting a beer in his bathtub. So I think it's a really good mix of like science and fun.
Yeah. It was, I mean, we were getting hit in the same way with the podcast. Before we had this show, we constantly got emails from people saying, are you going to start a podcast? You know, this is perfect fodder for a podcast. Same thing with the YouTube channel. Are you going to start, you got to start doing this on video. We just simply didn't have the resources. So I'm going to get into a little bit of the history about Martin here, because we get asked all the time, how did that work out? People kind of like the inside scoop on stuff. So I'll give it to you. But just to comment on his accent, I was prior to, as we were building up to the Brülosophy show, we hadn't released any episodes yet, but I was hopping on video chats with Martin. And one time I was in here and my wife was in the background doing something on her computer. And we get done and so she heard most of the conversation and she goes, look, if I could just listen to his voice the whole time, I'd be happy with it. There is a quality to the way he talks that is just so makes me feel good. We'll just put it that way. So now the history on how Martin got involved, he doesn't know I'm talking about this. I don't think I'm revealing too much here. I was a huge fan of what Martin was doing soon after he started the Homebrew Challenge channel, which is still up there. He's not going to take that down. It takes something a little bit crazy in a person to commit to brewing 99 beer styles in 99 weeks. I mean, that is a crazy I can relate with. When he started doing that and his success was very rapid, he started getting a lot of attention because he was doing it and he was doing it well and it was well produced. I first spoke directly with Martin back in 2020. So he'd already been brewing, doing this homebrew challenge for, I don't know, a year or two at that point. But he reached out to me with some questions about the business side of Brülosophy. He was asking, how do you organize this stuff? What are you doing with sponsors? All of this. We did a bunch of back and forth, and suffice to say, I liked the cut of his jib. He seemed to be taking it seriously. It wasn't just a joke for him. And I liked that. So we stayed in touch. We weren't talking all the time. And then at some point in early 2022, the Homebrew Challenge had become one of the top brewing related YouTube channels out there. I was watching his episodes every time they dropped. Certainly one of my favorites. So I reached out to see if Martin would be down for hosting one of our monthly Q&A sessions for patrons. He was obviously cool with it. He did it. But even after he agreed to doing it, we just kept talking. And at one point I told him about how many requests that we receive to start a Brülosophy YouTube channel. And I half jokingly commented that Martin should just come over to the brew side, right? You ditch the whole homebrew challenge thing. Ha ha ha. Come over and start this over here. And no shit, it worked. He took it more seriously than I had intended, and this led to a few months of very serious consideration and planning. And then in January of this year, we made an official announcement and dropped the first episode in February. We had there was some nervousness there. Is it going to match the success of the Homebrew Challenge? And I think anything Martin does video-wise is going to be successful. So the fact that we are where we're at today, after less than a year, almost pushing 20,000 subscribers, our videos crack that 10,000 view mark usually in 1 to 2 days at this point. There's just a lot of indicators that what he's doing there has been incredibly successful. So we're stoked to see where the Brülosophy show ends up, and we're happy to be able to provide yet another outlet for people to get their home brewing information.
How far we've come since you uploaded a video of you tasting a beer in your backyard.
Isn't that weird? I know that I was thinking about, I went back and I looked at the very first thing that I put on the Brülosophy website, which we're going to move into that here in a minute. It wasn't even an experiment. It was just, I think the first thing I did actually was the harvesting yeast from starters or something like that. But yeah, that was back in February of 2014. And here we are coming up on February of 2024, the 10-year mark. And we've got ongoing publications on the website. We've got 2 podcasts. We've got a YouTube channel. It really is exciting to look at. And I hate to constantly bring up that it costs money, but it does. And I really hope that we're able to keep doing it because I think people seem to like it. Now, a little overview. Like I said, we're already at 20,000 subscribers, or close to 20,000 subscribers on the Brülosophy show. And with these videos getting viewed a ton, way more than I ever thought, within just a couple of days of being released. And the comments that we're getting are hugely positive. So there's all of that. Now, one of the things that Martin and I have been talking a lot about, for those who are diehard Brülosophy show viewers, we started off publishing weekly episodes. That became a lot for Martin. When what we're known for is brewing stuff, right? So like brewing experiments, and those experiments, you know this very well, Jordan, take a lot of time. Martin was just burning out within a few months of doing this. And so we talked about moving to a bi-monthly or every other week publishing schedule. That has been much more manageable for Martin, but he misses the weekly stuff. And so we've been talking about ideas for moving back to weekly that are kind of, they make me think a little bit about the kind of like the applying the science thing with the Brew Lab, Jordan. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on this too, but the idea has been, do one of the normal episodes, and then the next week get another, have a conversation with somebody else in the brewing world, maybe like John Palmer or Gordon Strong, about whatever was talked about in the video the week prior. It could be another contributor, you, me, one of the other guys. But there's something about that I think could be really cool, and to kind of get another perspective on what was discussed previously.
Yeah, and then maybe break down some of the science behind what we found or didn't find too.
Well, not only that, but then we all have opinions. We don't talk about our opinions very much. This Brews Views episode is where we talk about our opinions, and they only happen once every 8 to 9 weeks, So to be able to go on weekly and share like, oh yeah, this finding, here's what I expected, and here's how it impacted me if it did at all, right? I think people are interested to learn about that, or, to talk about it with somebody like, John Palmer. What do you think of these findings that silly old Brülosophy came up with? I think it could be cool. So let us know if you guys are viewers of the Brülosophy show or have an opinion on this. Feel free to reach out and let us know, what you think about that idea, because I think it could be a cool way for us to get back to those weekly publishing of the videos. So. Now, in past episodes like this one, we've tended to focus on the website, brülosophy.com, up front, as it is what got us off the ground and serves as our foundation. Pretty much everything we discuss on this podcast is inspired by something that we've already published on the website. So why did we save it for last this year? Well, we don't want anyone who loves what we're doing on the website to get scared. We have no plans to stop publishing articles, but the reality is, given the changing landscape of this hobby, we have been talking lately about potentially making some relatively minor changes to the way we've been doing things for the past 9 to 10 years. Experiments, obviously, that series is our bread and butter. It's what we're most known for, though Short and Shoddy has given that a run for its money. That stupid saying that I came up with has become synonymous with Brülosophy, which for better or for worse, right? But since 2014, we've been committed to publishing one experiment per week, and somehow we've done it without missing a single week. That's 52 experiment articles every year for over 9 years. In 2023, we finally passed the 500 experiment mark, which is just mind-blowing. And people who like to go out there and, crap on us for no, they don't do replication. If you just go to our thing and you type in a variable, you'll see that we've repeated almost every experiment at least once, most of them multiple times on different styles with small tweaks to the variable, because we do value replication. What are your thoughts on that?
It's funny. We're running out of things to test. I'll have an idea and look, and there's 3 experiments on it.
Yeah, but here's the cool thing. You're like, okay, well, those ones were on, pale ale, pale lager, and a stout. I'm just going to do it on a brown ale and see what happens, because that is the idea behind replication, is how many times were they able to or unable to find a significant finding. And that's where you really start to get the meaning out of these experiments as they compile together. So we're really happy to be able to do that. The issue is that we've got so many other things going on now, and if we're being honest, it's been difficult hanging on to some contributors. I think some people join the crew and then they realize just how much work it really is. That we have been talking about, particularly if we go back to weekly publishing on the Brülosophy show, that we may move to every other week for experiments, and then, interspersing other stuff that we do, the Hop Chronicles, Short and Shoddy, Brew It Yourself, in between those experiments. It's not really going to change much for, people who enjoy reading the website. It's just going to be one less article per month. But we've had some talk about, rewarding our patrons with extra content as well. So another way for us to help support ourselves through your guys' support, really. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at with the website. Things have still been chugging along as usual, though. And I'm really proud with the fact that we've not missed a single freaking week for over 9 years now for experiments.
Yeah, and I think that means that we have articles coming out on Christmas and New Year's Day, given the way that the timing is working out in 2023.
Yeah, and so when you wake up, you'll have a little gift in your email, and that's an experiment article. So same thing with New Year's Day. We've stuck to it because that's how we roll, and we want to keep doing it. Now, Thursday content again. We did continue publishing weekly articles, though. Now that we share the Brülosophy show on Thursdays as well, we're doing kind of an every other week thing with that, which has been a nice relief for us because that's a lot of work getting all of that brewing done and the writing and the editing and all of that. So, but yeah, all of that is due again. We're not going to beat around the bush. It's due because of a decrease in sponsors, and we need to adapt. And so I'm open to that, adapting in different ways now. We're open to any opinions that, our supporters out there might have. So we're just hoping that Patreon really makes up for that because that is the best thing. We love knowing that we're able to do this because of people who actually enjoy that we're doing it. So we think that's pretty cool. But all in all, brewlosophy.com isn't going anywhere. It's going to stick around probably forever, longer than some people might want us to be there. And any changes we make will be done with our fans in mind. Now, the last thing I have on my list to talk about, just because I think it's so badass, and it's something that we don't really have much involvement in. That Will Lovell and Alex Shanksable are both still very much involved with the Brew Club on the leadership there. That's where we kind of pulled them from, was their work with the Brew Club. This club continues to grow quite rapidly, despite whatever lull we might be in homebrewing. They're currently at over 3,000 members now. All a member is somebody who follows the Facebook group. It is a free club to join, though I believe that they have a paid tier now where you get some perks for your involvement in other things, whatever, and for paying to be a member of the club. But man, they're doing such cool things. The Brew Club Experiment Series, where you have the opportunity to do your own experiment that we publish on the website. So a whole bunch of people get to read your experiment and the results from that. My favorite thing that the Brew Club does is the Average Brew Series, where everybody votes on a style and then they come up with, kind of a rough outline of what you need to use and the OGs you need to hit and all of that stuff. And then everybody brews this same beer. And then 10 people are selected to send them into us, and we get to drink those beers and review them on the show. There's some of my favorite stuff that we've done over the last couple of years. So if you're looking for a community of people, of like-minded brewers who are open-minded and like to experiment and don't get too hung up on themselves, check it out, man. Go to thebrewclub.com. It will redirect you to that Facebook page. You can join for free and have a cool community. You ever hang out with the Brew Club?
I actually was just invited to a meeting recently, and it was a really, they have a virtual meeting, I don't know, once a month or something, and my first time attending, and it was awesome. And what's really cool about this is it's international. There was a dude from Germany that woke up at 2 a.m. to join the chat.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, and there was a new guy from BC, and so that's what's really cool is I don't know of any international homebrew club where you get to truly talk about beer and beer culture across borders, and that is the beauty of the internet. And it's a really cool group and totally unique spin from your local homebrew club, which is people that live in your town or region, and you can do both.
Yeah, and we there's no my understanding with the leadership of the Brew Club, which again we are not involved with. That's not something that I do. I get emails about the Brew Club and I have to forward them to the Brew Club leadership because I don't want to be involved with that. I want them to have their own thing. I don't think he's going to mind that I drop his name, but the person you're referring to, I'm pretty certain, is David Shebby from Germany. And he's hilarious. He's also participated in our monthly, we do video chats for patrons who give us $10 a month. They're invited to a monthly hangout with people from the Brülosophy crew, us contributors. And we literally just sit down, we drink, we shoot the shit about anything. It doesn't have to be just brewing. And there was one time where David popped on and he's like, oh yeah, I got up at 4:00 in the morning for this. And he's drinking a beer with us at 4:00 in the morning. I mean, the dude is just so cool. But that's what really defines the Brew Club, are people like that, people who love this side of brewing with the spin that we put on it, and that experimental side. Call it science, call it whatever you want. We don't care. But that really is what I think is the glue that holds that club together. And people really seem to enjoy it. They're constantly coming up with new stuff. So again, thebrewclub.com. Again, you'll be redirected to their Facebook page. You can join there. You can introduce yourself. You're going to get a bunch of warm welcomes. I promise you. It's a really cool group of people. So that is all I've got for 2023. Jordan, is there anything else you want to say before we sign off?
Looking back, I think that all of this experience has really reinforced how much of a community beer really is, be it craft brewing, home brewing. It's all about doing it together. Cocktails, they don't have that, right? And so we have something really special here, and I'm really hoping that we can continue the momentum going forward into 2024.
Yeah, man. Again, I'm a sentimentalist at heart, and I think back every end of every year, and I'm looking back, and we're talking about these types of things. I'm just so grateful to have met the group of guys, even the contributors that are no longer around, to have had them become my friends and to help me build this thing that I love so much. It really is amazing, and I have to give so much of the credit to our fans out there. I used to not even use the word fans, but somebody told me that's what they're called. So let's just go with it. What you've done to keep us doing this thing that we love, it's just so ineffable for me to talk about. It's amazing. And we hope to be able to keep doing it. We have no plans to change anything at this point. And we appreciate, everything that you've done for us. We appreciate all of our patrons out there. You guys are numero uno for us. Thank you so much. We hope to be able to come up with some new, unique, fun rewards here in the near future. And of course, you'll know as soon as we do. So, well, don't forget to listen and subscribe to the Brew Lab podcast, where Cade takes you into the lab with brewing professionals to discuss the fascinating work that they've done on our favorite beverage. And make sure to head to brewlosophy.com to stay current on all of the fun beer and brewing stuff we are up to. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.